So again, my name is Craig Burlingame, Director of Technology, working in the office of the CTO. A little bit about myself. I've been at Imperva for a little over 10 years. So started out as a sales engineer, working in the sales team, worked with a few people. I noticed one person on this call today that I recognize. So hey, Nick, good to see you again. And what I'm going to do over the next hour or 55 minutes is we're going to talk about some of the issues around you bought the database or data activity monitoring system. Now, what do you do with it? How do you get it into place and giving you information that you need to support the purchase as well as get the most out of the system? So if we look at the problem, monitoring and auditing database activity has really become a critical challenge for most organizations. This is primarily due to the increase in the numbers and sophistication of the threats against that data, as well as the increasing importance of data integrity and privacy to customers and regulations. You've got things like GDPR, the CCPA, for California, and things like that, where regulations are saying people not only want to make sure that their data is safe, their information about them specifically, but they also have the option to say, I don't want you to keep that information. I don't want you to keep all that PII or personal information about me in a spot. So you need to be able to prove to them that you actually have gotten rid of it. You have forgotten about that information. So the data activity monitoring solution, or DAM technology, has become a key control for data security and compliance requirements. And when this is deployed properly, the solution can alert on suspicious activity or anomalous activity. It could also prevent it through database blocking through the agents. And it's going to give you the ability to, report on that potentially unauthorized access to sensitive data and the attacks that might be going against it. Now, two key factors in completing a successful deployment of the DAM solution really are deploying a good cross-functional team and establishing that team. And we're gonna spend about 5 or 6 slides talking about exactly the different groups that need to be involved in that team to make this successful. And then we're also going to talk about how to coordinate those functions or those responsibilities. And then we're going to walk through the tool a little bit to see just how you would do a basic deployment or installation of SecureSphere's DAM solution to get things started. Where do you start? Do you start with the site tree or data classification, discovery, things like that? So we'll spend some time in the GUI itself as well. So who needs to be involved? Now, over the years, I've met with many customers around data security, and we've always had, well, who do I need to get here to help out, get this thing rolling and get it configured? So I've broken it down into really 5 different teams that you'll probably want to work with. Information security, that's probably the bulk of who's on this call right now. You're the group that's going to define and manage and administer things like security policies, audit policies. You're going to make sure that those security policies are aligned with your company's security objectives. The security monitoring and the network operations center, or the SOC and the NOC, the SOC's going to be the group that's getting the alerts when attacks happen or information around, so-and-so touched this sensitive data, or we saw SQL injection, or we saw privileged users escalating other users' privileges, things like that. They're going to be the ones that review not only the logs coming out of SecureSphere, but they're also looking at IDS, IPS, your antivirus, other security, your firewall solutions. They're looking at all of those logs. The network operations group, they're the ones that are going to help you get the system deployed. They're going to give you IP addressing information, routing information. If you're racking and stacking our physical appliances, they're going to make sure that you've got the right cables attached to them to get you into the networks where the agents live, where the gateways need to live, connect the MX to the gateways, all of that information. Your IT management and database administrators, or the DBAs, they're the groups that's going to, they're managing the servers themselves. They're going to help you potentially get the database agents installed into those servers. They're going to do things like, if you find vulnerabilities, you're going to give them that information where they can go patch the servers, look for those configuration errors that might be causing some issues. The storage administration team is going to be the guys that help you keep all your archived data, your audit logs, and your SecureSphere backups of the systems themselves stored in the location. So you're going to have to coordinate with them to say, I've got all this audit archive. I need to keep it for 9 years, 7 years, 90 days. How often do I need to archive to it? And they're going to be managing the storage to make sure you don't run out of disk space for that storage of the archives and the backups. Excuse me. And then you've got the audit and compliance groups. And they're the ones that, for the primary use cases that I've been involved in, SecureSphere DAM has usually been bought for a compliance requirement, whether it's PII, PCI, HIPAA, GDPR, things along those lines is the first step into why somebody would buy, excuse me, SecureSphere. So you want to coordinate with them to see what audit requirements and what compliance requirements do you need to maintain or be worried about so that you can have the proper audit files or audit policies created, as well as having the proper reports created so that they're sent out and reviewed and you meet those audit and compliance requirements. So let's drill a little bit farther into this. So information security, like I said, most of the people probably on this call, their key responsibilities are going to be creating those audit and security policies. Now, if I look at audit and security, they're two completely separate functions of the SecureSphere tool. I look at the audit policies as kind of like my DVR. I may have 400 channels on my satellite system, but there's really only 2 or 3 channels and a couple shows that I want to watch at a later date. So the same way you can look at setting up your database audit policies. You may have 10,000 databases, but 100 of them contain your critical sensitive resources or the crown jewels of your organization. So you're going to set your audit policies to record the activity just on those resources, those assets. Now, that's not to say I don't have customers that I've talked to in the past that have an audit everything policy. And that's certainly doable. It creates a lot of information. So your audit archives are probably going to be happening more often, and you're going to have much more data to store in those archives, which means you need to coordinate more with the data storage team. You're also going to be looking at security attacks with the SOC, or the Security Operations Group. So they're going to come to you and say, hey, we saw this attack, or we saw this alert come through. Is this something that needs to be reviewed, where there's a new security policy needs to be created along those lines? Now, your security policies, and I'm going to steal this from the TSA here in the US at least, they have a slogan that says, if you see something, say something. And a security policy is simply that. Security policy is going to say, if I see someone do a select that returns 10,000 records, I want to know about that. Because the day-to-day solution or operations should only select 10 records. So they're taking back a much larger amount of data. Or it might be something around brute force attacks, what we call a velocity-based security alert. And that could say, if I see 100 failed logins in 60 seconds from the same user ID or session or IP address, source IP address, I want to generate an alert and send that off to the SOC, where they'll review it and they'll come back and say, hey, this is what we saw. Is this something, or they might have a policy in place that says, if we see a brute force attack, these are the people we should contact immediately to identify the problem and potentially look at the solution, whether it's blocking or something along those lines. The information security group is also going to look at user profile tuning. So one of the things in the database side of the tool is, as people interact with the databases, we're going to learn their usual behavior. So, we might see that user Craig generally interacts with these 4 databases and these 3 tables. And we see him only come from this source IP address using these applications. And we only do him selects. We don't see him do updates, inserts, or anything like that. Once that profile is learned, then there's a set of policies that go into place that say if we see Craig do something outside of his profile, outside of his learned normal behavior, we want to set an alert on that and generate an alert, which means somebody needs to go back and say, maybe Craig's role has changed and he's accessing new tables and new databases, which means we can relearn that profile if we need to. Or what I generally have customers talk or think about is if you've got specific application IDs. In this case, if you can see on the screen, there's one called Veda App. This is a user ID that's created for a specific application to access the back-end databases. It should only be coming from certain IP addresses and going to certain destination IP addresses. So I can manually create this profile and say that user is locked down to the following source IP addresses, the following databases, and they should only be doing selects. They shouldn't be doing updates or deletes. That way I set up front what the tool or what the application user ID can do, and I'll get alerts on that if they do something out of the ordinary. Some other responsibilities that the information security team is going to do is they're going to have, they're going to be the primary person creating reports. So whether these are security compliance reports, things like that, they're going to take the requirements that the other teams give them and set up those reports. They're also primarily going to be doing SecureSphere software upgrades. So as the patches come out, as the new releases of SecureSphere come out, these are the teams that are doing them. At least this is what I've experienced with most of my customers over the years. And they're also going to be the primary contact for Imperva technical support. So they'll be the ones that are opening cases, doing validation before upgrades are done, things like that. And just being that main connection to Imperva support. With the SOC, as we've talked about a little bit, they're going to monitor and analyze the security events like database access policy violations. They should be familiar enough that they can log into the SecureSphere user interface and get to the violations and the alerts tabs. This is where they're going to be able to look at the information, whether it's a high priority alert. They'll get information and be able to see like where the source destination IP addresses were, the username for the database that was involved, what databases they were trying to access. They'll be able to analyze that. They're going to help recommend adding new policies potentially with the information security team. They're also going to be able to tune security alerts. So they've got to be able to go in there and look at it and go, well, okay, we understand that that looks like an alert, but we're going to whitelist a very specific set of parameters that are generating a lot of alerts because that's normal application behavior. So tuning those policies to get rid of the white noise, if you will. And they're going to disseminate security alerts as well. They're going to take alerts, and if they're a high priority alert, they may have a playbook that says if we see a user escalation, followed by a large query select, we have a set of rules or people that we need to contact and give the information to so that the investigation can start to go look into that. The network operations teams, these guys are the ones that are going to go through and they're going to be working with you to, again, get the system deployed. You'll have to go to them for IP addresses. You'll need to go to them for the cabling if you're racking and stacking the physical appliances. What are your DNS server settings? What are your time server settings? What are the default gateways? How is this thing wired into the network so that it can see all of the database traffic and all the agents can connect to the gateways to give you the audit data? There's cases where an agent won't be able to connect to the MX or to the gateway as well. So they're gonna, excuse me, they're gonna work with you to troubleshoot that. Can you do a trace route? Can the agent get to the gateway, or is there a firewall rule that got missed during the deployment that's blocking that agent from registering into the gateway? So network operations team are definitely ones that are going to be in there at the early stages. as well as you continue to grow and expand the system. Your IT and DBAs, these are the guys, again, that are managing the servers themselves. So they're going to go in there, excuse me, they're going to review database vulnerabilities if you're running the risk assessment tests that come with SecureSphere. They're going to look at virtual patching of the systems. They're going to look at analyzing security alerts and audit trails. So if we get an alert that says, this type of activity, you might have to involve the IT guys and the DBAs to say, is this normal? Should this user ID be accessing these tables or this data on a regular basis, or is that something that we need to look at potentially blocking? They'll be making recommendations on what normal activity is for some of these users. They'll also help you with reviewing the user profiles, so as things change. And they're going to be working with you, at least in most cases that I've seen, in deploying the DB agents. I haven't run into too many organizations where the information security people, the people running the SecureSphere tool, are allowed to actually deploy the agents. Now, that could be a manual deployment. You could be using a tool like Ansible. So out on the Imperva GitHub repository, there's actually some examples of using Ansible to automatically deploy agents into the database servers as they're spun up. And so they're just going to maintain that. Now, you also want to maintain contact with these guys because as servers are decommissioned, you don't want an agent that's still configured out here, but it's not sending data back. So you're starting to get some system alerts potentially that say, hey, this agent hasn't sent data back in an hour or a day or 12 days or along those lines, which means they're going to hopefully have a process to let you know when servers are decommissioned so that you can go in and remove that agent from the configuration so that it's not just sitting there taking up resources. Storage admin guys, whether it's you're using NFS or you're doing a secure FTP or you're doing a SAN connection from the gateways for the audit archives and SecureSphere backups, these are the people you're going to talk to. You might have small storage requirements, or in one case, I had a customer that had to keep 7 years worth of their audit records, and that was equivalent of about I think it was 170 terabyte of storage for all of theirs. Now, they were generating 2 billion audit events a day. So they were archiving every 3 days. They were sending an archive off to the back-end storage. So they had to maintain that conversation with the storage people to say, make sure you don't run out of disk space, because I can't lose audit data. I have to be able to go back at some point, potentially 7 years, to retrieve that audit data. And then you have to work with them to get those archives pulled back out of the storage as well. The SecureSphere backups, hopefully you're backing up your SecureSphere systems on a regular basis. That way, if you do potentially have a hardware failure or have to redo a VM MX or anything along those lines, then you're going to want to be able to go back and pull that backup, that latest backup, so you're not having to reconfigure everything from scratch. And the last group's the audit and compliance. And that's, again, why the bulk of the database access monitoring systems that I've worked with in the past with customers have been always starting with audit and compliance. So they're going out there. It's PII, it's PCI, it's HIPAA, it's SOX, GLBA, whatever the case is. They're the ones that are going to review the reports. They're going to tell you probably what your activity monitoring, what do you need to monitor, whether it's looking for credit card information or personal information. They're going to tell you how long you need to keep that data around. They're also going to make sure that you maintain the segregation of duties. So one of the key reasons that Imperva was bought when I started here with customers was it did create that separation of duties. Because all of the auditing is done through Imperva and not through native logging, then there was the ability to go back and say, well, you can manipulate native logging. A DBA could, in theory, log in there, or a hacker, and disable logging, do something, and then re-enable logging. But in this case, all of that audit's being captured and sent to Imperva, where it's encrypted and it's stored in a secure way that you can go back and say, yes, I did see that type of access or whatever that attack was that you want to go back and do an investigation on. They'll work with you on the user rights review. So there are certain compliance requirements that say every 90 days, every year, you need to look at who has access to the data and how they're getting that access. So the Imperva SecureSphere tool does have the ability to do a user rights scan and come back with information about how a user is getting access to certain tables or databases or views. And you can use those reports as part of that user review or user rights review so that you can go through and sign off on those, or they can sign off on those requirements. And then generally, they're going to be the interface with the executives or external auditors, if required, to go through and take a look at, are you meeting those compliance or regulations? So that is kind of like who you need to get involved. Now, some organizations are going to have all of those people or all those teams. Other organizations, I've seen one person be all of those people. So there obviously is the potential that you will wear many hats if you're running the SecureSphere solution. And at that point, you really just need to be able to get a system that's deployed in such a way that you're not having to, manage your security policies and your audit policies on a daily basis. You want to use the scheduler as much as possible in SecureSphere so that you can automate a lot of those things, such as the data classification scans, the discovery scans, your reports. You can have them set up on a schedule so that they're emailed off on a regular basis when they're required. So using those tools means that you can spend more time doing your daily job of potentially just interacting or acting on security alerts and things like that. So where do we begin? And I'm going to go into the tool now. Hopefully you can all see my browser. And I'm going to go ahead and log into, okay.
We see it, by the way.
Okay, great. I'm going to see which one of my admin passwords. Sorry about this. Huh?
Right off the gate, huh?
Yeah, right off the gate. And I was just in here for about 10 minutes before we started. So let me just go in here and let's see if I can get to go back. Yeah, gotta love live demos.
It happens.
All right.
There we go.
So hopefully you all are familiar with this interface, and we're going to go ahead and get in here in a second. This is just a test system that I've got running that gives me the ability to go in and create different screens, different site trees, different policies, test things like that. And the spinning wheel. Boy, I gotta love live demos. How are we doing on time? About 30 minutes in, so we're good.
Right now you're doing okay.
All right.
Somebody goes long password. And I just said safe and secure.
That's right. Password 123. No. All right. So once we're in here, the primary way and we're going to do is you're going to start with defining a site tree. Now, what a site tree is simply a way to create a view into your world. And with that, what we're talking about is I've seen customers do geographical site trees where their sites are defined in a country level or a continent level. I've also seen them create them for application level. So in this case, you can see I've got a site called Imperva One, and I've got a site called VetaPay. And within that, I'm creating something called server groups. And a server group is simply a collection of IP addresses that are in scope for me to work with. Now, With our agent technology, we've gotten it to the point where I don't have to define what the actual IP addresses are like we used to back in the old days, as they say. But this is a way, so I could say within Imperva One, I've got my server group that is all of my databases. Or I could break it down to, I have a server group that's my MySQL and my Oracle databases. So it's just, again, that collection of, we start at the application name, then we get into what the server groups are. You also see one called Web App. So that server group is really configured for my web interface if I was using SecureSphere to protect the web. Underneath the server group, we're going to have the services. Now, in this case, I've got a MySQL service. And services, if we look at them, these are all of the databases. And I hope this is big enough that you guys can see this okay. But a service is a way of telling SecureSphere, this is what to expect from a protocol and a database type when traffic comes in, when audit traffic comes in, based on that source application or source asset. So in this case, I've just got I've got a MySQL one, and then underneath there you've got applications. Application is the lowest common denominator that you're going to work with here, and that being, I could have just a default one that covers everything, or I could go in and define what the databases are. So I could say a database called customers, I would create an application called customer. And an application in this sense is not necessarily like Microsoft Excel or a web application or something, but an application is a database. So I could tie this down, but in my case, I keep things simple, and I've got the default MySQL application defined. This is where I go in and I start doing things like, do I want the operation to be simulation or active? Disabled means if I were running this in a blocking mode or in line with the agents or with the gateways, disabled means just pass through. Don't apply any policies, don't apply anything to it, just let the traffic flow through. Simulation is if I had a block policy in place, I'm not going to block it. I'm going to tell you in the alerts that I would block it, but I don't actually block it. And then active modes means if my agents are set up for blocking and I put a blocking policy in place, that is going to block that database access. Now, I will tell you that in 10 years here at Imperva, I have had one customer actually implement database blocking. Then it was for a very specific single database access use for an offshore access to assets that they said should never be accessed outside of the United States. So they had to define some source IP address ranges and say if anything in that address range ever tries to get to one of these database assets, block that access. So it was very specific.
Hey, Craig.
Yes.
Quick question. If the customer has local credential for asset that you have to configure on OS credentials, will you recommend to configure one group for each server, or how will you handle that kind of off?
Okay, so you want to use a specific OS username and block them from certain database assets or all database assets? Do I understand your question, Chris?
Jose, did you want to?
Oh, yeah, Jose.
Yeah, hello. Sorry, may I speak by microphone?
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. I have seen in some cases where you have to configure the OS credential for assessment, for example.
Yep.
And the customer doesn't handle Active Directory authentication for all his databases. And for example, they have different local credentials on each instance for the database. And how you will handle that to configure the OS credentials, many OS credentials for each server? Will you configure directly each server group for that credential and configure a different server group for different servers? Or how will you handle that?
So you could do it. Excellent question, Jose. Thank you. So I've seen it handled both ways. I could have just within within the server group, your credentials for vulnerability assessments and things like that are handled at the service level. So again, here I'm at the Microsoft SQL. So I could say for all my Microsoft SQL access, I have a username, a local username and password that'll be used for all my MySQL. I could do that here in the default database connection, but if I had users for individual MySQL servers, I would have to go down here under database connections and add one for each of the MySQL servers for the local one. Now, if I had multiple services under here, I could still keep it as a server group, but I could add Oracle service underneath here. Then in Oracle, I could have a different default database connection, or within Oracle, I would define the individual ones as I did here for MySQL. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Very thank you.
Okay, great.
Craig,
Yeah.
we have a couple other questions. I can ask them later or no?
No, I might as well throw them out now.
Can DAM be integrated with Cisco ISE for authentication?
Not that I have seen anything in the last 10 years. I have not seen integration with Cisco ISE. So my guess is going to be, or my answer at this point is going to be no, but it's something that we'll look at and see if someone else has found a way to do it outside of Imperva support.
Great, thanks. And if somebody has experience in that, please post it here on the chat. Go ahead.
Probably you can integrate Imperva with CyberArk.
Yes, CyberArk integration is available. There are how-to documents out in the support knowledge base on how to do that, and I've actually had customers that integrate with CyberArk for that.
Perfect. Last question. I've seen a case where the site tree was disabled, but we received alerts. Is that a bug or expected behavior?
So the mode was set to disabled, but they were still getting alerts.
And he says, please replace site tree with server group in the question. So instead of, sorry, Rakesh, let me try to say this. I have seen a case where server group was disabled, but we've still received alerts. Is it a bug or expected behavior?
My experience would say that was a bug, because my understanding and experience with disabled is everything passes through. Nothing is looked at from the gateway level. So that could be a bug. I would say it's not expected behavior.
Okay. For now, that's all the questions. I'll let you go ahead.
Okay.
I told you there's going to be a lot of questions.
Absolutely, and I love questions because it makes for follow-up on new sessions.
Awesome.
All right, so we've got our we'll go ahead and assume that at this point we have our site tree all set up. We're then going to get into classification, because the reason you're doing this, my guess is, you have critical assets that you want to identify and protect. And the way we do this is, unless you know exactly where all of your sensitive data is, you want to go ahead and set up a classification scan. What this is going to do is, using those credentials we were just talking about in the site tree, you're going to go ahead and you're going to set up different data types. Now, Imperva comes with a lot of data types already defined, such as things like payment card numbers, credit card numbers. We use the LUN algorithms to identify that. You can do regexes. You can create your own using regex or column names, information like that to define your own data types if they don't fit within here. You then create a scan profile, and that scan profile is where you're going to add what data types do I want to get or do I want to use within this. You can go in and look at things like, do you want to scan views as well? You can go in and adjust the data sample accuracy. So right now, 75%. If it's matching to 75%, excuse me, I want to include that. So we create the scan, the data types, we create the scan profile, and then we go in and create the scan. And we're going to tell it what profile to use, we're going to tell what part of our site tree we want to apply this to. So we're going to apply this to all of the tree or very specific resources. You might have a site tree that's set up for PII data and PCI data. So you would scan for credit card numbers in your PCI site part of the site tree, and you would do, username, passwords, and things like that for the other one. You would set up your schedule. So how often do you want to run this? And then you can go in and you can see the history. So you can see that the last one that ran finished well. You can click on the information and see what, how many servers were scanned and things like that. But then you want to go into the classified data. Now, one of the settings that you have is to automatically accept the information. So if it identifies it as a credit card number, you want to go ahead and say, I want to automatically accept that. So in the classified data, you'll get the scan name, what type of data was found, the database and schema and table that was identified. Is it a table type? Is it a view? Where was that information found? The status existing. Once you run a single scan, you will see things either existing or new in here. So at that point, you're going to say, if it's new, you can go in and review it, or if it's been added automatically. I got to move something out of the way here. You'll see the site tree, the server group, what type of service it is. So in this case, it's the service name, DB owner. You can actually identify or assign DB owners so that you know who to contact. The table group, the table group status. So table groups are, once we've identified data and you've accepted it, and you can say, here, I've accepted it automatically, we create the table group, and that's simply the site tree, the database table, and the data type. So that's a table group that's used later in policies. And all this process, what it's really getting down to is it's creating table groups and lookup sets of what sensitive data is, because now you can go in and you can start creating policies, whether they're audit or security, around data that's been identified as sensitive. So the next section that we go into is we start talking about policies.
So Craig,
Yep.
Before we go into the next section, two questions. One, exist templates for Latin America or Mexico for data? Does it exist for data classification?
Country specific ones, not that I have seen. I'm sure customers have done custom data types. But the default ones that come out of the gate are really just regexes for things like table names looking for username or password column names. Do they fit things like username or alphanumeric at alphanumeric? So we're looking for email addresses for a regex, and the credit card ones. I have not seen anything specific at a country level.
Okay. Thank you. And then last question. Can we use this scan to find SOX data in DB?
That's an excellent question. We're going to have to follow up on that one because I'm not sure of how we would yeah, you stumped me.
I was about to say, we stumped the pro.
Well, I always heard it as stump the chump, but
yeah, well.
But yeah, so that one we'll need to look at because I'm not sure how you would use a regex or whatever to identify what SOX data is. So that's an excellent follow-up that we'll do a write-up on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. Let's see. I see we got about 15 minutes. So from a policy standpoint in audit, here again, we can do things. There's a lot of pre-defined audit policies that are in SecureSphere. You can see things around specifically PCI, around SOX. These are all table or policies that are using match criteria, which you can see there's a lot of ways and a lot of points to create a policy. But in this case, we'll just look at a quick one that says access to classified data. So what that's going to do is that's going to look for at least a select against anything that's been classified in the objects. Now, if we haven't done that data classification scan and we haven't accepted the results, This classified objects doesn't exist. Now, yes, there are some things like DB2 system objects. Those are defined by us in our ADC or our Application Defense Center. They keep on top of things like, what tables in Oracle are critical as part of the system. So those are predefined objects. So you could enable this and at least see if someone's touching the system parts of your databases. But the classified objects are ones that are done specifically around data that's been classified as sensitive. We'd go in, we would decide, hey, we want to assign this to what part of the tree. I'm going to assign it to, everything. I could click there. Settings, I always want to collect the events, and that's going to give you the information about, what the query looked like, how many records were returned, that type of information. What you don't want to do is you don't want to generally collect or check the DB responses, because what that means is SecureSphere is going to not only give you the event, but they're going to take what the end user or what the DBA saw. They're going to save that same data inside SecureSphere, and my caution on that has always been twofold. One, it triples or quadruples the amount of storage you need to have for the audit because you're storing the responses. So if you're in a very busy system, you're storing all of that information, but potentially you're going to store sensitive data inside SecureSphere as well, which means all of a sudden, if I get a return of a credit card number, now SecureSphere is part of your PCI scope because we're storing credit card information. So you might have a specific use case where you need to enable this temporarily. What I would say is build a new policy that has as specific parameters as you can down to the source IP address, the source user, the table name that they're going to. Look at those responses and then delete that policy and purge that audit data once you've identified what you were looking for so that it's not stored on the system. Archiving, this is where you'll define how often do you want this policy to archive. If it's very busy, you might be archiving on a weekly basis or every 3-day basis. If it's a lower use one, you can say, I want to archive this on a monthly basis. You have full control through Action Archive settings on how you want to and how often you want to archive this information. The last field here is external logger. Now you could come in here and so we have followed actions that say you can send this off as a syslog. And the most use case I've seen is people want to send all of their audit archive or all of their audit events to Splunk. Now, if you do that, a couple warnings. A, if you're generating 2 billion in audit events a day, you need to talk to your Splunk admins and say, A, can you handle 2 billion audit events? And with Splunk costing what it does, is there budget to store all of that data on a daily basis inside Splunk? So that's where the external logger is. Now, with that, hopefully you've all seen, excuse me 1 minute, our announcement yesterday of our intent or of our purchase of JSonar. And JSonar is a premier logging system that works not just with us, but with all other data sources. So you can do things like Google Cloud and Azure and a lot of the big data databases that we don't support in SecureSphere right now can write their audit data into JSonar, and we're going to feed our solution in there well. So if you're familiar with what we had, the EX platform in the past, this is going to replace what that EX was. It's an enterprise level logging solution where you can send all of your audit data to it from all of your MXs and all your gateways and all your database servers and have it in a centralized location where you're going to be able to access that data, run your reports, do your research, do your investigations, and have it all inside there. The thing that also says is you can archive and purge your audit data from the gateways on a nightly basis if you want to, so that you aren't keeping that disk storage on the gateway, you're using JSONAR, and JSONAR can do things like moving data from nearline to offline to, cold storage. If you're in like an AWS environment, they can write to Glacier. They can move it from high-speed disk to low-speed disk. So they've got all those tools built in, as well as the ability to consolidate data from or audit data from different sources. So,
Okay, correct.
Yes.
So when archiving, does it always cause Gateway to run out of disk space?
No, it doesn't cause it, but if you weren't archiving, I guess there is the potential that in a high-use environment, you would eventually run out of disk space on the gateways. And then what you're hoping is you set up a system event that says if the gateway gets to 80% disk, send me an alert. Does that make sense, Chris?
I think so, yeah. Another question, for DAM agent will monitor DB network traffic. So it can learn the password or fetch credit card or another sensitive detail, and DAM support engineer can view it. Is there a way to avoid that?
Yes, there is the ability to use masking of sensitive data. So in the tool, when you set up the server group, you can add data mask dictionaries, where you can say if it spots a credit card, replace all but the last 4 digits with stars, or replace all with stars. If you say things like username, password, replace those with stars. So there is a way to mask the data in the alerting information as well, so that the SOC engineers don't see that sensitive or critical data.
Great, thank you. And I'm saying, if you feel like you're running out of time, just keep going. It's being recorded so that if they miss it and they have to go, we can still have this, if that makes sense.
All right, excellent. So that's audit policies, though. That's setting up that DVR functionality to record the use and the interaction with the databases that you specifically say are critical that you want to watch. If we look at the security alerts, and I'm going to say no on that, security alerts are creating that if you see something, say something. And there's a lot of policies already in place. You see WAF policies here too as well, because I do use this for both. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to create a new database service, and we're just going to call this example. And we're going to say, you can see that we do violations and signatures, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to do a DB service custom security alert. So the security alert, again, I have all of this match criteria that I'm looking for. And we'll just do a simple one here, a velocity-based one, where I'll go number of occurrences, authentication result, and I'm looking for brute force attacks. So I'm going to say if the authentication result failed 100 times in 60 seconds from a specific source IP, or from the source IP. So this is telling me they might change username and password or usernames to try, but if it's 100 failed logins from this source IP address in 60 seconds, I want to alert on it. So action, none or block. None means I'm not going to block it, but I'm going to alert on it. To me, this is a high severity alert. Now, I could have a followed action here where I could say, well, I could do a long block or a short block. And what that means is if I had blocking at the agent enabled and the server or the server group was in enabled mode, then what it would do is it would say, okay, for the next 5 minutes, block that IP address no matter what they try and do. I could do a terminate session. The followed action could be send an alert to my SIM tool. So send an alert to Splunk or send an email to certain individuals or an email alias. So I would go ahead and I would set that up. And then I go in here and I say where I'm going to apply it. So I would go in here and I'd say, well, I only want to apply it to my Imperva 1 server group or site. Or I could drill down and I could say within that, I want to get it all the way down to the service type. So I might only apply that to my MySQL services and not my Oracle if I had Oracle underneath that server group as well. So that's where you start creating those alerts, those things like user privileged escalations, You could set up source IP address groups that say if it's coming from outside a country or outside of my server farm IP address ranges, then I want to alert on that activity or potentially block on that activity. We've got our policies set up, both audit and security. You're going to want to spend a little time in the audit itself. So are we collecting the information that we think we should be with those audit policies? Now, I've only got one enabled right now, which is a default. But if you had multiple audit policies applied, this is where you would go in and see the list of them here. Now, you'd see the fact that you've got, in this case, 1 million events collected by the default rule in our case. You can drill down, you can say in the last hour, you can do time selection or time frames. At the main screen, and I'm not going to go through, we could spend a full hour, hour and a half session just going through the audit dashboard. But this is where you're able to go in and look at it. And if you look at the data tab, this is where you're getting things like the user, the source IP, where they were going, what service, the operation, the objects, false, number of times you've hit that, the response size, so cumulatively, how many records have been returned. And within here, I can go through and I can drill down. I can say, I want to, ignore login. So I could click on here and I could say, exclude this value, retrieve it. All of these other views over here are just different ways of slicing and dicing the data and all of that audit data. Once I've drilled down, maybe I've added a bunch of filters, I can go up here and I can either save it as a report or I can save it as a PDF. The save it as a report takes us into the next section, and that's where we go in and start creating reports. Now I want to go in here and I'm going to just say, let's not look at the favorites. Let's just look at everything that's enabled. There's a lot of reports that are here by default. And you can go in here and we can look at DB audit. You can do a daily audit trail. So what that's doing is it's looking at, here's some information around it. We're going to export it as a PDF. I could do it as a CSV. Do I want a cover page? What orientation do I have it? If I had an email, I could say email it here, or in this case, I have a followed action called export it to S3. So I can write this to an S3 bucket that I have access to so somebody else can go in and review it. Data scope, this is where you'd set up things like the last day, the last week, the last month, the last 7 days. Do I want to filter anything? So do I want to say ignore these databases or only accept or include these databases? Tabular, I always thought this should say columns, but these are the columns that you're going to see within the report. And there's a bunch more that you can select from, but these are just the ones that are in here. So this is where you would go ahead and set up your reports. These could be HIPAA, PCI, anything along those lines where you're doing those audit reports or compliance reports. Create different graphs involved. And then you can set that schedule. So you may create the report, but you don't want to have to come in on Monday morning and run this report every Monday and send it off to someone. Here you would go in and you could say, okay, I want to run it every Monday or weekly on Mondays. I'm going to start it this coming Monday and I want to run it at 5 p.m. Let's go in and say, let's do it at 4:30 a.m. And because I can set a followed action, this would actually then run and email off or upload to S3 on that scheduled basis. So now I don't have to come in here and I don't have to do this. If I've got 27 other things that I'm doing, then what'll happen is I can set it and forget it with this report. It's going to happen every week and go to the right people. The last section that I want to talk about is the alerts. Now this is where you're going to spend some time with your security policies. And I always tell people, set up your security policies. If the SOC is doing it, then they're going to want to do what I'm going to talk about next. Or if you're doing it, you can do it as well. Once I've got the system deployed, I've got my security events set up, what I want to do is I want to go in here and I want to sort this, double clicking on the number column so that I can go in the alerts and say, okay, what is my high hit? What are my ones that have the most occurrences in? And then I want to go in and I want to look at that. Now, this is a WAF signature. This could be a DAM or DAM alert as well. But we're going to get things like, okay, what were the actions? What were the followed actions? What is the policy name? In this case, this is a recommended signature policy. We have these in there for database as well. You can potentially edit the policy. You can go look at the knowledge base. You'll get 30-minute increments of how often this is triggered, and then we're going to aggregate it. So in this case, this is not like a one-to-one every time the alert happens. What we're going to do is we're going to see if we can aggregate this view for you. And in this case, what we're seeing is, let me just expand this out a little bit. We're seeing things that say, okay, the custom rule, so the name, the immediate action, the protocol's TCP, service was HTTP, and the source IP. So all 32 of these events happen from this same set of aggregations. Now, from the statistical standpoint, we could see what geolocations it's coming from, the different URLs that were accessed, different user agents, or different database usernames, things like that. Then you can click in and you can drill down into this and get all of the detail around that alert. This is where your SOC is going to come in, and they're going to be looking at it going, okay, on a database alert, this could be a privileged escalation or a table drop if you're looking for table drops. Once you look at that, if that's normal behavior, you could go in and you could click on this add exception. And what that's going to do is give you the ability to say, if it's from this source IP address and they're dropping this table name, that's a regular occurrence. So I want to add an exception to my drop table policy so that I don't get alerted on it. I'll still get alerted on every other drop table, but in this case, this specific combination, I won't be alerted on. So best practice on this is go in there and review these at least once a week. Look at your high hit, high event count policies and see if they're still valid or if they're just generating too much noise and you either need to tune the policy or potentially delete the policy and create a different one that's going to give you more pertinent information. So if we go back and we look at it, really what happens is you want to set up the site tree, set up your classification, go find that data, get your audit policies and your security policies set up, look at the reports, review the audit data, and then just review the system on a regular basis so that you know it's still providing you that information and that return on your investment so that you can go to your management and say, this is the tool and this is the information it's giving to you. So with that, there's been some questions that I had come up with. Chris, do you want to continue these? These are from what we found, so I can always ask these and respond to these on the community itself, or should we just continue going?
It's a good question. I think you can continue if you'd like. I will say this, a couple of people said, just so you know, this is very valuable, sometimes more than training. And then Rakesh says, I agree and happy to see these webinars happening more with new topics and best practices.
Okay.
So this is good. I think you can answer those questions and we'll record it. And then if people want to go back and listen to it, that'd be great.
Okay. So one of the biggest questions I've always gotten is, so what policies should I have? And I really hate to use the response, well, it depends, but it depends. If you're deploying SecureSphere DAM for audit requirements, if that's your main use case, then you're going to want policies, both audit and security, that are corresponding to things like privileged user access. What are the privileged? What are your DBAs doing? You may be looking for those, like we talked about, a query that returns, 10,000 records. That could be looking at data exfiltration, somebody trying to steal data or accumulate a lot more data. And that one's always kind of like, well, for some customers, that number is 10. I was meeting with one customer a couple years ago, and they said, that number is 500,000 records because we have people normally selecting 250,000 records, as part of their job. So if it's more than 500,000, I want to know about it. If it's security is your prime use case or primary use case, then you want to look at things like, again, that failed login, brute force attacks, access to database data assets that's outside of normal source IP ranges. We talked about privilege escalation. So the core policies you should have, there are ones that are enabled by default, things like default policy for database applications. Those are on by default and applied across the board whenever you create a new site tree, database, server group, or database service down to the application level. If there's specific things around audit and stuff like that, that's where you'll need to work with the other people within your team, or within your company, whether it's the audit and compliance groups or the DBAs that they want to know if certain things occur. It's really just sitting down and having those conversations. My recommendation is have the tool open so you can show them things like the match criteria when you're creating audit policies or security policies, and say, these are the types of things we can use to create the policies. Which of these is going to help us fit your requirements? Next is, how do you maintain those policies? That's all around that review. Log in, go to the alert screen on a weekly basis. Sort for your heavy hitters. Are those still relevant? Are they still giving you the information the SOC needs to initiate an investigation or a response? Or are they just generating white noise or noise that you need to go tune out? How best can small security teams, teams scale their efforts? That one's probably the hardest question that I get asked all the time. And the reality is, get your site tree set up in an efficient manner so that you're not having to go in there and create new sites, new server groups on a regular basis. Your agents, when they register, make sure they're registering to the right server group, then they get the policies associated with them, and they'll start sending the information. So using tools like Ansible, the agents themselves have a silent install script option where you can script out and give it a configuration file that it'll read when it tries to install. And then just leveraging the other groups that you can. If you have a SOC, make sure they're the ones that are reviewing the security alerts and coming to you if they have questions on it. But they should be able to log into the tool and look at those alert screens. Managing or monitoring your DAM deployment performance. This is probably the one that happens the most or gets asked the most. There are certain sections within SecureSphere under the admin side where you can look at gateway performance, MX performance. Under the agent screen, you can look at things like what agents are generating the most traffic, either sent or inspected. Can I tune those out? Can I use agent monitoring rules to maybe say ignore these 3 processes because they're only backup processes, they happen every night, and I don't need to generate audit reports on backup information. So, and then there's also, again, out on the GitHub, the Imperva GitHub repositories, there is a tool that we've developed, and I actually got to be part of this one, that uses a script at the MX and the gateway that sends a bunch of performance information off on a minute and every 5-minute basis to an InfluxDB instance where we use Grafana to create dashboards of how much memory is being used in the gateway, how much disk is available in the gateway, how are the CPUs performing in it. Same information for the MX so that you can see, is it time to get a second MX or a third MX and move some of the gateways off of it? Do I have one MX or one gateway that's just overloaded? It's just running at 98% CPU all the time. Memory's at 98%. I need to get another gateway spun up. So using these tools, you can start identifying where those potential performance issues are and doing what you need to do to move things around to get the performance more distributed. And the last one I get always asked the time, and I touched on this a little bit, is how do I integrate with Splunk? sending security alerts to Splunk is very easy. You set up a followed action to say send syslog on security alerts or network alerts to Splunk. It's got the import capabilities. It knows how to read the SecureSphere syslog messages, and you start getting the dashboards of that. The audit data, again, if you want to start sending 2 billion in audit events a day to your Splunk guy, you're going to get two people. One's very happy with you, and that's the Splunk rep who's got to sell you that much more Splunk. And your Splunk administrators are going to say, whoa, I got to build 18 more Splunk listeners, and I've got to do all this other stuff. One thing that we can do now with the integration of JSonar and the acquisition of JSonar is you can send all of that data to JSonar, let it do the parsing, the processing, and the storage of all that audit data. And they have a connector that says Splunk can connect to their data and their data stores and still give you those Splunk dashboards that you're used to looking at. But all of that data is stored in JSonar. So you're not paying to store all that information inside Splunk. It's just kind of the front end, the GUI, to the data that's stored in JSonar. JSonar also has hooks where you can run things like Microsoft Business. You can run Tableau against it. So they're a much more open platform for data storage that's going to give you that capability to store all that audit data in a single spot and then have access to it for your reporting capabilities and other needs. So that is really what I had. I really appreciate everybody joining today. I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to turn it back over to Chris.
Craig, thanks so much. I mean, 30 people stayed on just to listen 10 minutes after, so very helpful. And it's funny, you read my mind about the JSonar stuff with the Splunk. I was going to ask you a follow-up question, but you answered it.
Oh,
So thank you. And hopefully everybody got some value out of this. You must have. You stayed on an extra 10 minutes, 11 minutes now. So thank you, Craig. Thank you for coming, everyone. Really appreciate it. We both have partners and customers that use DAM a lot. We get lots of DAM questions. No pun intended, I promise. But,
but believe me, when I started here, the best thing I got was the first meeting I got to walk into and go, so let's talk about this DAM solution. And it was a fun time.
Jose says, please schedule another webinar, 2 hours at least. So I
All
think
right, Jose, challenge accepted.
We'll put those in hour increments. How about that?
Yeah.
So I know that Craig's going to have some really good stuff in the future. So I'm excited to see what that is. I knew that this would be a hit. Like I was saying, people said, this is kind of the best kind of training is this hands-on training. So I'm going to let everybody go. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to stay on for maybe a minute or two, just in case questions come in and things like that. So Craig, thank you. Thank you to the audience, and thank you for your questions and answers. This was, voila, awesome.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.
All right, man. Go get a cough drop.
Yeah.
Glad you guys liked it. Seeing awesome. This was great. Schedule 2 more hours. Yes, I agree. Thanks. D-Bag, I'm not sure. I've seen him before, but awesome. This was good. Craig, this was excellent.
Good. I have a hard time feeling if I'm going too fast, too slow. Too much information, not enough information. So.
Yeah, I don't think you're too fast or too slow. It was just right. Like I tell Brian, he's kind of he has so much information he wants to give out that he just goes fast. But the stuff that he does is really awesome. And then even Rakesh says privately, which you won't mind, he goes, we'll wait for Craig's next session. Really nice. So
yeah, let's you and I offline. Let's start. It's kind of like Peter's API thing. I can see this as at least 3 or 4 session follow-ons.
At least
diving into specific parts of the tool.
Yeah, I like that idea. And then if you guys are still on and you have thoughts on what Craig should cover, feel free to either put it here or send me an email directly. You can go communitymanager@imperva.com. So, all right. Well, thanks,
All right.
everyone. Craig,
We'll
thanks so
drop
much.
off. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.